Light is something that as photographers we just crave for. We crave for that amazing bit of special light just to give the landscape that extra dynamic. And when you find it, it's just so thrilling. But sometimes trying to capture it, trying to get the right shot is difficult. In this video, I'm going to give you 7 ways to make the best use of light, whether it's no light at all, so just an overcast day, or some amazing side light or backlight. Good morning and great to see you all again. This is going to be a good one, this. I'm really excited about it.
Just doesn't get any better than this.
I've spoken about the 4 elements before in a video here that are important in every photo, and that's light, composition, subject and timing. The 2 most important, I think, are light and composition. So all good photos need to have strong composition, but adding light into there, having something that's amazing light, and knowing how to control that light can make the difference between an average photo and a really, really spectacular one. I love light. I've been a bit of a geek about light for many, many years. So I actually did a PhD in physics, and it was around the control of nano thin layers to look at how I could improve the anti-reflection properties of glass for solar panels. It's a bit of a mouthful. But basically it was designing coatings like the ones that go on the lens on front of your camera to make sure you get as much light through into the solar cell. And those anti-reflection coatings are on all camera lenses, because obviously you've got lots of elements in your camera lens, and at each interface you probably get around about 4% of the light reflected if you didn't have this coating on. So you want to be able to have coatings on all the elements in the lens to make sure you get the most light through into your camera. We need to just forget all that sciencey stuff, because that's not that important. What really is important is understanding how light interacts with the land in the landscape that you're taking. So, you know, if you've got low light or warm light or backlight or front light or side light, how do you use that to best emphasize the things that you want to emphasize in your landscape? And how do you creatively use that to create a really, really good photo that you'd be super proud of and you want to hang on your wall? And there's lots of different ways of doing that. And what I want to do is touch on 7 things that I think are really, really important in getting that really great photo. So we'll get straight into it. On to the first point, which is using light to provide focus in the landscape. So it's really important to think certainly when you've got shafts of light coming down. This is often useful in the sort of middle of the day, or after sunset and before sunrise, although you can use this at any time of day. But if you're out photographing and it's cloudy and there's beams of light coming down, then it's often good to use this when the light's sort of drifting across the landscape. So if you look at this photo here, this is a fairly simple one where I've just used the light to give focus to the valley. The biggest thing that this does is it draws your eye down the valley into the distance. Whereas without this at all, then there'd be no focus to the image. It'd just be an image of the valley. So by providing focus to your eye using the light, then it's made a really big difference. Okay, the next one is an image that I took over 10 years ago in Yosemite. The first one shows a light coming down the side of the mountain, and I was basically waiting for that to be in the best position to get the best shot. So where it compositionally felt best, because there was these shafts of light coming through onto the mountain. And obviously in this particular image it just doesn't work. But when I waited a little bit and it just appeared on the bottom of El Capitan, then you can see that it just looks a much, much stronger image. And it actually provides a light background for the silhouette of the tree, which I feel gives scale to El Capitan. So on this image, I was actually waiting for the light to hit the building. But as that was happening, and you can see the light coming, it was coming round the mountain, it hit the green grass at the back. You can see that, I don't know, it just gives you that morning feel, but yet there's this real sharp, strong element of light in the image which sort of pushes your eye down to the building. You know, it's almost like an arrow, I suppose, down to the building. So I thought that worked really well. And then the final one was, I was actually on a workshop a few weekends ago, and we were just down at Blitarn, which is just an amazing place in the Lake District. It was probably around about 11 AM, something like that in the morning, and there was just like again, shafts of light just coming over the land. We took lots of different shots here, and what we were doing is waiting for the light so that it accentuated the things that we wanted to accentuate within the image. And in this case, I wanted this tree on the right-hand side to be more prominent. You know, if you look at the photo here without the light on the tree, you can see it's significantly different. On to point number 2, which is caring about shadows. So shadows are something that quite often we avoid in landscape photography. You know, if there's a strong shadow, we always think, oh, maybe it's not going to work because it's too harsh, the sunlight, and maybe we don't want to use that shadow. But often shadows can be used really, really well and powerfully in composition. So take a look at these two shots. So these are both using shadows where I was shooting into the sun. I was using the shadows as a way of leading the eye through into that image, into where I was taking that tree. And I just think it works, as well as being a great backlit scenes. I think it just works really well having that shadow in the image. I think without the shadow, it just isn't quite as dynamic. It doesn't lead you into the image as much. And then this other image, which again demonstrates this point, is a shot that when I was wild camping up on haystacks in the Lake District, and this is Buttermere, I saw this shadow. I saw the leading line of this river going down, but then I saw the shadow was moving around as the sun was setting, and I was waiting for the shadow to sort of line up with the sort of rake of the hill, really. And again, I think that looks really good. I don't want to bring up the shadow detail again too much because I want that light and dark in the image. And I think using the shadows like that can provide really, really strong compositions. So just think about how you might use shadows for your advantage rather than thinking, oh, I don't want to shoot because there's lots of harsh light and strong shadows. So the third point is colour. Now obviously light provides colour in our scenes, whether that's refracted light or reflected light or absorbed light, and learning how to use that colour in your photographs and how you might use it to your advantage can make a really big difference to your photographs. Try and use contrasting as well as complementary colours. You know, I've talked about this shot a lot where I had this really sort of pastely sunrise, and then I had this pastely sort of coldness to the water. And by using those two fairly contrasting colours, created a very strong dynamic in the image. And then if I'm taking a sunset where I'm just taking the sunset and I'm trying to use that orange colour, then quite often I'll use blacks in the image, you know, or silhouettes in the image, because I think it's just a way of providing a good contrast to that orange colour. And then also, don't think that you've got to have light out all the time to use colour. So if you think about the blue hour, so either, you know, just before the sun's risen or just after the sun's set in the evening, that's when you can get some of the best quality light. You get soft light on the landscape, and the colours in the sky can be really, really amazing. Quite soft, but really amazing. Again, this one at Buttermere, I took probably about 20 minutes after sunset, and you know, we had this really sort of pastel glow to the sky. I've used the light to my advantage where there wasn't a huge amount of light, but I'm using that reflected light from the sky in the actual lake. So just by thinking, you know, what in the image can I use to create strong shapes, then the water was reflecting that sky colour, and it just created such an amazing shot. So that leads me on to point number 4, which is just thinking really carefully about how the light interacts with the surfaces in your image and your landscape. You know, how's it reflecting off the water, or how's it reflecting off the road or off the leaves? You know, what's happening when the light's coming through the trees? Is it getting softer? Have you got a big wall that it might be reflecting off and giving you some good reflected light? If you start to understand how it's interacting with the surfaces within your landscape, then I think you start to get a better appreciation of light and start to spot those things more. So it's a really good thing to go and look for when you're next out. So a good example of this is a shot here, which was a really rainy day that I had in the Lake District again, and I'd actually slept out in my car on this road because I wanted to get the sunrise down at Buttermere. Just before I went to bed, there'd been a lot of rain. Then the sun just started to come out in the distance, and the reflected light on the road was just so spectacular. Again, the same happened when I was in the Faroe Islands, and I was brave enough to take my drone up just after it had rained, and it actually started raining again when I was up there, so it was probably a daft idea. This drone shot just shows the advantages you can get when you get reflected light off surfaces, and this road just looks so good going down into the distance. but it may just be the height of the light as well. If you have sun really high in the sky, then that's going to illuminate a rock very evenly, and you're not going to see the texture in that rock. But as the sun drops down, you'll start to see the texture in the rock, and that can make a really big difference to the shot. So if you look at these two shots, one of them hasn't got any sun on it, but it gives you an idea that it's more difficult to see the texture in the rock and the grass. And then the other one, the sun's quite low, and you can see that as well as improving the colours in the image, that you start to see the undulations in the rock and the detail in the rock a lot more. So by having a low sun, it doesn't just provide nice light that on the landscape, but it also brings out textures in rocks in the foreground as well. So it's something that's really, really important to look for. And the same thing happened here when I was in the Alps. You can see that the sun, you can see exactly where the sun is, and it's just picking up the detail in that snow there, and it just provides really, really nice sort of subtle sort of texture in the snow. And just by looking for that when you're out, you'll start to see different things, and then you'll start to pick out compositions that you perhaps didn't see were there in the first place. So it's really worth trying. So number 5 is there's no such thing as bad light, and trust me, I've had my fair share of bad light.
We're not going to get a sunrise. But I'm out in the Peak District, in the mist, in the rain, and it's fantastic. And I think I'm going to get an absolutely great shot with this scene here and these trees and the clump of trees below.
As you've seen from there, I shoot in fairly poor conditions quite a lot, and I embrace it really. Ideally, you can get some really strong golden light or some beams of light coming out of the sky, but you don't always get that. Quite often when you go out, you get quite flat light, or you get like really harsh, middle of the day sunlight with blue skies. And usually we don't like that, we don't want that. But it doesn't mean that you can't take really good shots in that type of light. Because actually flat light allows you to do things that sunlight doesn't allow you to do. Water's a really good example of that. So if you've ever tried to photograph waterfalls, it's better doing it when it's an overcast day, because you've got more control over the dynamic range, and you don't get those burnt out highlights when you have long exposures. I mean, this is a good example of, in Iceland, producing an image that's quite strong. It's got a strong composition. It's quite powerful image, but there was no light. It was dull and it was overcast. Actually, about 6 hours later, we had the best light ever, but at this point, it was just dull and overcast. And I still managed to get a really good shot, because actually what I did when it was dull and overcast is I concentrated on getting water movement shots, and I produced a lot of nice shots that I was really pleased with. Then you can also, when it's overcast like that, go into the forest and take lots of good forest shots. Now ideally you would have fog like this image here, and that even adds another element to it and separates the layers. But I've taken a shot here which again was just a very overcast day. There was fairly boring, it was probably around about midday, but that overcast layer creates like really nice softbox and creates this really even light. And when you're taking pictures of trees and plants and things that are a little bit more complicated, having that even light just simplifies the scene a little bit. Okay, on to point number 6, which is directions of light. So there are 4 different directions of light, which is top, side, front and back. So top lighting is where you have the sun high up in the sky, and you don't have very many shadows. The shadows are very short, and it's quite harsh white light really. But you can still do things. You've just got to look for really, really powerful shapes and color contrasts in the image. So take this shot that I took in California. It's just using really strong color contrast of the sea and the beach, and then these birds are just the anchor for the eye. So it's a really simple shot taken at midday, and you can do things when you go quite close in, I find, on subjects. And then the other one is this black and white image, and I find black and white works quite well when you've got blue sky, because I really don't like blue sky that much, but converting it to black and white, you can get some deep blacks in it and it can look quite strong and powerful. So obviously we've got a stunning mountain here, the fog at the bottom. Yeah, I mean, it just creates a really powerful image, and this was taken at midday. It was just before my lunch, I think. So it was taken with a long lens again, just picking out the amazing mountain, and then just using the contrast of shadow of one side of the mountain with the other side of the mountain. and it just works really well because it's so simple. It's so geometrically simple as well. So yeah, that you've just got to think simple when you get harsh light. Side lighting is probably my favourite. I think using side lighting where the sun's just off to the side and then just illuminating the scene can be absolutely spectacular. So take this image here. So this was an image that I wanted to take to show how brown it was in the summer this year. You know, I know that in lots of different places in the world that you're used to really hot weather, but we are really not in the UK, and having that really long spell of dry weather was really unusual. And this valley that's usually really super rich and green was brown, and then we had this morning sunlight that just get this side light just coming down. And I suppose this uses two things really. It uses point number one, which is focus, and then side lighting. So backlighting is good for multiple things. So if you're taking a picture of a tree, just getting it backlit and then having the dark scene behind it can really pull out the leaves in it. So that's a really good idea. And then just not worrying too much about shooting directly into the sun. These two shots, I've actually shot directly into the sun. I've shot a lot here. In the summer, you shoot directly into the sun, and in the winter, the sun's off to the side and you get side lighting, so it's quite different. But I actually quite like shooting directly into the sun, especially when you just get a little bit of mist in the air and it just attenuates the sun just a little bit, and it can be really, really powerful. So the final point is looking out for atmospheric conditions, which is fairly obvious really, and I'm sure everybody gets excited when there's just been a rainstorm and you go out and everything's quite lush, or there's fog forecast for the morning because it's rained hard the night before, and then there's really still clear conditions overnight and the fog comes out in the morning. But it's really important to look for those conditions. That's when you will get some of your best photos. It makes taking photos so much easier. You can get real dramatic conditions, and it really adds to the mood of any image. So this was an image that I took in the Lake District just after, handheld it with a 35mm lens on my Fuji, which is the lens that I have on my Fuji most of the time, a 35mm f2 lens. Again, you know, this shot here is shot in fog, and you'll see many of my photos are shot in fog. I think it really brings something to the image, and it allows you to separate elements in the image when you've got fog. But importantly, it diffuses the light, so you get very diffuse light, because obviously that light source is coming through and then getting diffuse. And then finally, it can make a big difference to not just landscape. So this was a shot that I posted recently on Instagram. Hopefully you can see that okay, of the beautiful pebbles, and this is pretty much out of camera. I edited it slightly, but it just makes it so much easier when you have a bit of fog in the air, just to create a very sort of soft, sort of moody portrait. And yeah, I mean, just look for when it's rained, and then when the rain's just finished, going out and trying to take a portrait like this or something like that when there's no direct sunlight, and I think you'll find you'll get something pretty good. Okay, that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. And the best thing about light is just getting out on a hill or a mountain or in a forest or in just a beach and just sitting down and just enjoying watching it change. There's nothing better than that. I often spend hours and hours and hours on the side of a mountain just waiting for light, and it's just one of the most relaxing things to do. I've just got a little bit of news. So I've still got some places on my Iceland workshop, the link's below, and I think I've got 1 or 2 places on my Peaks 2-day workshop, and also on the Glacier National Park workshop as well. So all those are linked in the description below. And until next Sunday, bye.